Good to see you all, visitors. Good to have you here. And just want to say a few things before we get into our talk this morning. One night, guys, did you hear that Ashley's announcement? Paint, what's it called? And sip. What's the sip part of this? Is there something we need to know about? I'm just wondering. Yeah, well, that's... just to add a little bit to what Joanne said, it's kind of an interesting point in our lives because now Corey's been gone as long as he was alive, nearly. I mean, we're right at that 9-year point, and kind of an interesting thing because in some ways it feels so far back and in some ways it doesn't. And I told you this, I had this tradition for about this thing I did. I won't call it a tradition. Every Sunday morning, if I was in town for about the first 4 or 5 years after he passed away, I would go out to his grave every Sunday morning. And God gave me a promise when I was walking through that time. And the promise was a verse in the Old Testament that says, when you walk through the waters, it won't sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you won't get burned. And gosh, there was days I felt like I was burning with pain. It felt like I was underwater. And I went out there for that reason. I'd sit by his grave and I'd say, God, you told me this. And I'm going to believe it. And for all of you who have been part of our lives in this journey, even if you've recently joined our lives, I don't think you know how much you've meant in this healing process. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah, that's enough. Just one more thing, and then we'll get into our talk this morning. Because it has been, President Trump has called this a day of prayer. We're going to end our service. So Zach's going to come up at the end, and we're going to intentionally spend time in prayer. And we want to really remember a nation that feels like it's coming unhinged on certain levels. I don't know if it felt that way to you. But in this whole thing, there are older people here who are not with us this morning, or younger families, because they just don't want to get sick, and I get that. So we're going to especially remember them because they're sitting at home this morning, and I'm sure they're missing seeing you guys, and so we want to remember them at the end of the service this morning. For those of you who maybe are just either visiting or maybe haven't been here for a Sunday or two, we're at this point in the book of Matthew. We're going through a study of the book of Matthew, trying to understand what it means to be a king, a person in a kingdom that has a king like Jesus, and so we're in Matthew 5 now, verses 27 through 30. I call this "Looks Can Kill." You've heard the expression, if looks could kill. Like, have you ever gotten that look from your wife? Well, looks can kill, according to this text. So let me read this, and then we'll take it apart. You've heard the commandment that says, you must not commit adultery. But I say, anyone who even looks at a woman with lust to covet, we'll come back to that later, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. Let's pray. God, I pray this morning that as we're together this morning, that we would hear your heart from this text. We would take a deep look inside. God, help us to move away from any excuses we might want to make, and honestly have you search our hearts this morning, because we really want to be like you. So grow that desire in this text, through this text this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, I want to it's going to take me a couple minutes to set up this talk. So let me set up this talk by a couple of ways. Remember, I told you that it talks about Jesus preaching the good news. And so I challenge you that as you read anything he says, the people of that time looked at it as that is really good news. So as you look at this, what's the good news? Well, I want to just throw out a couple ideas. This was really especially good news to women. Now, in case you don't know about the culture of that day, a woman's value was based on, she basically was viewed as a sex object and a servant. It might be oversimplifying it slightly. And when I say the culture said, it didn't mean that there wasn't cases where it was viewed differently. But in a lot of ways, a woman in those days' value was only to satisfy the husband and to service the husband's needs, whatever they were, make sure that his food was cooked and all of those things. So the value of a woman was way low. And when Jesus starts to talk about this, he's immediately elevating the value of a woman. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit in our talk. The second thing that Jesus is doing, he's fighting for marriages. Now, why is that important? Well, if I was to ask you, why are you married to the person that you married? What would you say? Okay. But what attracted you to her? Maybe we don't. Yeah, yes. Why do I ask questions? See, I'll get into a little more of our story at the end. Just a little bit of it, because our talk is not about marriage, it's about a part of marriage that is going bad. But when I think about Joanne, she was fun to be with. She had all these she was just a really cool person. And I'm like, But what I didn't really calculate is the whole thing that what God brings together, don't ever let man pull apart. God was at work in ways I didn't even know it. And so what I want you to know that when Jesus is talking about this issue, he's saying, I'm fighting for your marriage. Now, I know even as we sit here, some of you come from marriages that didn't work and all that. What I want to say to you right now, the marriage you're in, he's fighting for that marriage. He's fighting in ways you don't even understand. And so he's addressing one of the key things that'll break marriages apart. That's why he brings it up. It's a hard talk for guys. And we're going to just try to be real frank as we kind of go through this. The third thing that I just want to mention is what he's doing here, and this is what he's starting to do, and he's going to continue doing in the next few verses, the next chapter or so. He's starting to say, okay, you've heard this. This is wrong. So last week he said, you're not allowed to kill. Killing is wrong. Murdering is wrong. And then Jesus takes it a little further and says, but I want to address the part of your heart that makes you want to murder. See, he takes it one step further. He's going to do that in this text. He says, you guys know that because I brought two lives together and I joined them together, that nothing is supposed to break them apart. So what I'm going to address is some of the issues that might make them break apart. So he's really fighting for marriages again. He's really passionately fighting for that. And I just want to say this in case you wonder. Next week we're going to jump over the next couple verses. The next couple verses actually deal with the issue of divorce. We're going to bail on that. Not because it's an uncomfortable subject, but because later on in the book there's a whole text on that. And we're not going to teach it twice. So we're just going to, Alex is going to be up next week and he's going to take the next text and then we'll come back to the divorce and bring it back into what he's saying here and what he says in that text and try to make some sense out of it. But I just want to say this is an extremely difficult topic. And I want us to think about it in light of this. One of the things that was kind of interesting after the Super Bowl this year is I'm not a Facebook kind of guy, but I occasionally get on, and if I don't join, kind of keeps me up on some of the stuff that's going on. And one of the comments that was made about the halftime show was this: why would the NFL put that kind of a halftime show on when there's kids watching? Why? I want to ask that question and shorten it. Why would the NFL put that kind of show on? Question mark. Forget who's watching it. See, here's the thing. Doesn't it feel a little bit like we're in a nonstop Super Bowl halftime show in our world? That's our world. That's why this is a difficult thing for guys. I'll tell you why the NFL did. One, the NFL doesn't give a damn about marriages or families or kids or you. They care about money. And think about if you were to kind of construct a way to make lots of money, you combine two things, because most of its guys really like these two things: football and sex. Bam! That's why they do it. And it feels like for guys, it's right here. We're in, as I said, a nonstop Super Bowl halftime show all the time. And so that's one of the difficulties. Here's another one of the difficulties. I'm rewinding the clock now 15, 20 years, and I'm going to try to, some of you know this person, and so I'm going to try as best I can to not reveal who this is. But Joanne and I had this guy come into our lives, and eventually I became friends with him, and I invited him to one of our Bible studies, and we began to make conversation with this guy, and we asked him, we were trying to get an understanding of who in our Bible study, where they were in their walk with God or their knowledge of the Bible. Were they Christian? It didn't really matter to us if you were Christian or not. We just wanted to know so we knew kind of what we had and where we were going with this Bible study. And so I think it was Joanne asked him, have you ever read the Bible? And he said, I started in Matthew 1. And I got to Matthew 5, verse 27. And I started to read that, and here's what he said. He said, I really like to lust. So I closed my Bible and said, this book isn't for me. Now, that kind of honesty kind of freaked me out, because that doesn't happen in Christian circles a lot. And I appreciate it. I learned to especially love this guy, because you never had to guess where he was. But that's the problem. Some of the problem. The last thing I'll just say before we can move on, if in some ways, as we read this morning, if you were sitting here looking at it like, you got to be kidding me, I want to tell you, in that culture, it was really that way. The people of that time the guys of that time were saying, are you actually being serious with us? Because you got to understand, here's where the demeaning part of the women of that time, here's where, if a woman was caught in an adulterous affair, she could be executed. If the guy was caught, the women wasn't even allowed to squeal on him. See how he's elevating the value of women here? Like, they are not sex objects. They should never be treated that way. So, is that uncomfortable? Let's move on. Let's move right along, get into it. This is for all of us. And the first thing I want to say is this. Let's look at the heart condition. Here's what's happening. There's this recognition of beauty that happens in our lives. Now, I want to say to us guys, I want to say this. We are wired, not just us, creation, all of human beings are wired to recognize and appreciate beauty. We get that from creation. We get something else from the fall that I will mention, but if you notice an especially attractive lady and it catches your eye, then you haven't done anything wrong at that point. It's not what he's talking about in the context of this, because we are wired to recognize beauty. There's just something captures our attention about it, and there's nothing wrong with that. So that's where it all starts. And then it goes to here. Now, my particular translation that I used NLT, didn't use this expression. Some of the others, so now you see a beautiful lady or just a lady, whatever, and she catches your eye, and then you find yourself not looking away. It's called the look. Now, I have women in my life. I have Joanne and 3 daughters, and we'll be somewhere, and all of a sudden they'll and I'll be totally maybe eating a dinner or whatever, but all of a sudden they'll say, "That guy's a creeper. Like, that guy's staring at us. This is weird." It's that kind of look. It's the kind of thing where, like, uh-oh. Now we're starting to cross a line. See, beauty catching our eyes, nothing wrong. It better catch our eyes, or there's something wrong with us. But now we're starting to move into what we got from the fall. And that's this. The word that is used, if you chase down the Greek in this, the word that is used to describe what happens next is actually translated in other parts of the Bible as coveting. Now, I want to take you back, and I want to take you through this so that we understand what happens inside of us. So when I see a beautiful lady, or whatever, however that happens, it could be on your phone, it could be wherever, and then I start to, I don't look away. You know what that means. And now I'm coveting. Now, why it's interesting that he uses that word, if you go back to, let me take you back, and I don't want to kind of muddle this up, but I want you to see what God's actually doing here. In the 7th commandment, he said, you should not commit adultery. In the 10th commandment, he said, you should not covet. What he's actually doing is saying, if you don't learn to, if you're a coveting person, you're probably going to be a person that eventually commits adultery. You have the possibility of that. Why? Why does he link those two? Jesus, he brings those two together when he talks about it. For this reason. What is at the heart of coveting? Let's go back to what he says in the Old Testament. God said to Moses, when you write this command, thou shalt not covet, he said, now, when you look at your neighbor's house and you look at what your neighbor has, and you look at the animals he has, you look at the servants he has, you look at the stuff in our day, you look at your neighbor, you look at somebody that's in your life, and you see they got a nicer house than you, they got a brand new SUV, and you're driving an old pile. And there's something starts to happen in you, and it isn't this appreciation that God has especially blessed that person, and they're living in abundance, and maybe my life isn't, but I have all this. Look at what I have. You start to make this comparison. What happens in coveting is they say, man, I got to have that, and if I would have that, my life would be so much better. Right? And so you look at that image on your phone, and something says, that's not my wife. See what's happening? If I had that, my life would be so much better. If I had that experience, if I could just have some of that, then life would be good. And we start to covet. And now we are in real problems. When coveting hits, guys, man, not just me, you guys seen it. You've seen men walk away from marriages, from kids, from possessions, and all that for a one-night fling. You got to be kidding me. That's how much it grabs us. Starts with beauty. There's nothing wrong with recognizing beauty. It moves to man. And then it eventually comes into a coveting in my heart. And I make this comparison between what my experience is, what I have, what I see, whatever it is, and I look at that. And especially when it comes to this thing of a woman's body, and I said, man, I got to have some of that. And now we're in real trouble. So Jesus says, the only way you ever recover from this is drastic action is required. You understand, you can always have some assumption of what the sickness is, the disease is, by how drastic the cure is, right? That's your gauge right there. He doesn't say, dude, you got to memorize a couple verses or all of us would be in fine shape. He doesn't even say, maybe you ought to attend, or you get the point. He says, you know what, when you recognize you have a problem, and this translation, again, doesn't say right eye, right hand. That's strategic in this. That's important in this. He says, when you know your eye's causing you problem, he doesn't even say go to the surgeon, have it taken out and wear an eye patch. He says, gouge that sucker out and get rid of it. It's urgent. It's imperative because you're in big trouble at this point. Why would it? Well, let me just back up and explain to you why in the original text it says right eye, right hand. Because in that culture, the left eye, left hand was considered to be the weaker. He's saying, are you willing to do the drastic measures that it takes to actually find freedom in this? Like your right eye was the one you couldn't afford to lose. Gouge that one out. Your right hand, get rid of that. Now, I think all of us know he's not talking literally here. There were people, well, let me talk about that culture. There was a group of rabbis in that day. There's an Old Testament verse that says, I have made a covenant with my eyes to not look lustfully on a lady. Some version of that, some spin on that. There was a group of rabbis who made this covenant. They took it literally. It wasn't a heart thing. They weren't dealing with their heart. They were dealing with their eye thing, and they thought that was probably good enough. So this is how it worked out. This is real now. Whenever they were walking or out doing something, and a lady came into view, they would instantly shut their eyes. This is what they were called. These people are operating during the time of Jesus. They were called the bruised and bleeding rabbis. For obvious reasons. They're closing their eyes at a certain time. They were stumbling or running into buildings. They were doing whatever. He's not talking literally. What he is saying is, if you understand how drastic this situation is, are you willing to take the steps to actually find a cure? And the cure is not a Band-Aid. The cure is dealing for something that's inside of your heart that will look at beauty and say, I got to have that, and fail to recognize the beauty that you do have. See, even today, we do exactly what that culture did. When we do that, we take women to a sex object, not somebody created in incredible beauty by creation of Jesus. We reduce them to that. Let me do this. Let's just go through. So that's kind of the heart condition. The eyes get us in trouble, and then it goes to not looking away, and then it eventually goes to coveting. I want to talk to you just about three ideas from this text that we can kind of work out, because This is important because if Jesus is fighting for marriages, our church, our lives need to be fighting for that same thing. And I just want to say this. Never settle for a victory. Pursue freedom. The only way we will ever find victory in this is if we become cultural atheists. We have got to quit believing the lies that our culture is telling us about this. We'll never win this one if we're believing lies. And the lies are, if you have that lady, that's the lie. The other thing I just want to say, and I don't want to make a big deal about this, but I do want us to think about this, guys. What Jesus is asking of us is to live in victory in freedom in this area, not especially just to have a victory now and again. It's almost like this, and this is what I've done so much in my life, in this area and other areas of my life. And this is something I find myself fighting through over and over again. It's like I have a bullseye. So if the bullseye is moral freedom, and on a given day, I shoot my arrow here, you know what I do? I hit the bullseye. Does anybody else do that? I just move the bullseye. I'm doing all right. Really? It's not about having an occasional victory that he's leading us in. He's not talking about occasionally winning a battle. He's talking about freedom that lives here. Oh, and all of us know that we're going to have our but we're not out here shooting around. Eventually, we learn to live here. That's what he's asking of us. That only happens when we begin to push back on the lies we're being told all the time in our culture about this issue. Second thing is this. Radical honesty is essential. Because of that. One night, let me talk about this just a little from our experience. One night, Joanne and I are laying in bed, and even as I thought about this, and I didn't ask Joanne about this because I don't even remember how much she remembers about this. It made a huge impression on me. And this is a rewinding clock some years now. I think it kind of come out of a situation, if I remember correctly, that we were working with a situation that the marriage was in all kinds of trouble and had to do with adultery or something related to that. And anyhow, we're laying in bed and we're talking, and then I'm ready to go to sleep, and she asked me this question: are you having victory with lust? Well, if you want to get a big iceberg between you, go throw that right before you doze off. Like, what in the heck? Where did the... You know, and it was at a period in my life where I was doing really well. I said, I'm winning. And she said, why do you think you are? And I don't know to this day how to answer that question. But I tell you this to talk to the ladies here, and then I want to talk to the guys. Here's what I knew immediately from that. She actually wanted to hear the truth. She wanted to be married to a winner. Now, here's what can happen. I've seen it happen in situations, and probably at some level, it could have happened to us. But let me say it this way. Let's just assume that I was steeped in pornography and had a relationship going that she didn't know about. Do you think I would have told her? Here's what can happen, and I want to say this to the ladies very kindly because I think we have some amazing ladies here, and I want to talk to you. Had that been the case, and I told her that, I'm just talking how I process things, and I'm kind of a weird guy, so I don't know if anybody else would process this way. But here's how I process this kind of stuff. We're laying in bed, she asked me, and I say, yeah, well, there's this, and anyhow. I'm probably not going to go to sleep that night. Because there's something inside of me says, if I actually fall into a deep sleep, there is at least an outside chance that Joanne's going to slip out. And she's going to go in the kitchen, and she's going to find a sharp knife. Or even worse, a very dull knife. And I'm going to lose some sex organs over this. Now we actually have a real problem. No, what I'm saying to you ladies is create a culture where the guy can be honest with you. Because this is a war in the heart of a guy. This is not some little skirmish that's going on. This is a war he's trying to win. He doesn't need you against him. He's got to have you on his side. And I know it hurts when we fail. Ladies, I know it hurts when us guys fail. But you have no idea what that meant to me when I realized even though at that time I was with, I knew if I wasn't, she was going to be my biggest warrior to come alongside and say, I'm going to help you win this thing. Because if it's going to become a battle between us, honesty's probably not going to happen. So that's what I'd say to the ladies. To the guys, be okay with telling your wife when it's not going well. We don't win them all. I mean, that's at the end of the day, it's just create a culture in your marriage that has this openness to say, because that says, I failed today. Would you come alongside of me? Because you're going to ask to be a warrior for her in parts of her life where she's in a war. And she needs to be a warrior for you in parts of your life where you're at war. And together you become a team that's powerful. And you can take on some big stuff and win when you become a team. The other thing I'll say before I go to my last point is just this, guys. Part of the way we're wired, and this is part of our sinful natures, is the thing about you know this, and ladies, you know this. Us guys, looks, our eyes get us into all kinds of trouble. Refuse to blame something for that. Well, you don't know how she was dressed. It's still your problem. Don't we make excuses for ourselves at times? Just man up. Look in the mirror and say, that's me. Because now there's a chance of redemption when you actually refuse to put blame somewhere else. Last one is this. Never underestimate the expulsive power of a new love. Man, for somebody who's good with words, could you just do something with that? I worked on it and I worked on it, and it just bugs me that I didn't do a better job on that one. But let me just say it this way. Let me take this apart on 2 levels. Then maybe it'll make sense. And then someone come up here and help me with that afterward. When I was a teenager, actually I was in my early 20s, I started, this is the best way I can describe how I think about this. Sorry, I started dating, as we did in those days, going out as they do now, with a girl, and her name was Sally. And nice girl, really nice girl. Had a lot going for her, but after, it didn't take us real long And somehow it just wasn't happening. I don't know how to describe it. It was probably me. It could have been her. But anyhow, this mess up here is just distracting as heck. We decided that this wasn't a good fit. It was both of us. And so we quit the relationship. It was probably harder on her than it was on me. I was ready to move on. She wasn't so much. And so it felt like because we were in the same community, same church and all, it was all tangled. It felt like she moped around and kind of, I don't want to make myself look like I'm worth moping over. I mean, this is going bad on so many levels. So let me just get to the point. When she got over me, when a new guy came into her life. A lot of times, guys, let me just talk to us, guys, and then I'll go to the second story, the second part of this. A lot of times, guys, we don't view freedom from the perspective of freedom. We view freedom from the perspective of bondage. And so what I mean by that is just this. We look at this issue, and maybe if this is an issue that you've had problems, maybe you've been stuck in pornography, maybe this stuff is like you've taken a serious whack at it and you're not winning. You're stuck in it. We can start viewing freedom from the perspective of bondage sets this up as, man, if I ever get this, I'm finally free. Here's the problem with that, and here's what I challenge you guys with. Sometimes the best way to get rid of something that's controlling your life is to fall into love with something better. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't focus on issues and deal with them and maybe find help and maybe find an accountability group or whatever it takes. But some of the reasons it's so hard is because I never lose my love for that issue and I never lose my desire for it and I don't fall in love with anything better. And guess what? I'm stuck loving the thing I'm trying to beat. What if I'd fallen in love with something better? What if I fell in love with Jesus? What if? Now I'm viewing freedom from the perspective of freedom, not bondage. I'm adding something of value to my life, and I'm pursuing something that has the power to set me free instead of focusing on this thing and making it the sole kind of focus of my life to whip something when I don't love anything better. Second one is this thing that I want you to think about in relation to that, kind of on a side part of this. In my early 20s, I was friends with a guy who was blind, and he wasn't in my life for a very long period of time. But I was really struck by one thing about that guy. In that short period of time that I knew him. And I don't know if this is actually true, but it felt to me like once you lose your eyesight, you develop a way to hear differently. Because you have you're now dependent on so much of your world on just your hearing, because you can't see anything. And we would literally, he would be sitting, if he was sitting in a room by himself, we would take our shoes off and try to sneak into that room and sneak up on him. Never once did we accomplish it. He suddenly would look and say, "Who's there?" And I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" Here's why I tell you that. What if in conjunction with falling in love with Jesus, we lose our sight for the stuff that captured our attention before, and we started hearing him. The reason we don't hear him is not that he's not speaking, it's that his voice is oftentimes much softer than the halftime Super Bowl party that's going on. What if I'd actually learned to hear his voice in his heart for me? Now, to wrap this up, let me just say this. I hope you leave here, guys, I hope you leave here with a sense of hope in your life. And if you're losing this battle on any level, here's what I would say to you. Losing that battle means that you live in shame and guilt and condemnation over and over and over again. There's freedom for that. And maybe if you need prayer, if you need to connect with a team, whatever you need, please do it. I hope you got the urgency. Drastic measures are needed. You need to do it now. Not 2 weeks from now when it feels better. Deal with it now. Begin that first step. And I also encourage, as we kind of wrap this talk up, I really hope that couples start to look at each other and say, do we have an environment? Have we created an environment in this marriage that if I'm failing, I can tell you, and I know you're going to fight for me, not against me? And if you haven't, this morning, do that. Because what will start to happen is this appreciation for the beauty that God has brought, not for something that's on a phone or something that's out there, for something that He's intentionally connected you with. The appreciation for that beauty will start to blossom in ways, and you will find your relationship as in this marriage relationship going places that it will never go if you keep losing. And you stay separated and not on the same team. So if you want prayer, or if you want to, whatever, please, the urgency is now. Because looks can kill. And that was the point of this talk when Jesus originally said it. So Zach, if you come up. If anybody needs prayer, the prayer team will be up here.